Welcome to the Rotary News Network. My name is Margie Seaman. I am sitting in a new seat for myself. I am trying to fill the shoes of a predecessor named Ken Durkee, whom you all may be familiar with because Ken has been doing this show for 17 years. And I didn't think it would be right to begin my chapter with the Rotary News Network without giving Ken last licks. So my guest today, I'm very pleased to tell you, is Ken Durkee, who will finally be able to talk about himself. And with that, I do want to say to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. And we're very glad to have you, and we hope that you'll tune in monthly. We expect to have a good lineup of guests this year, starting with Ken Durkee. Hello, Ken. How are you doing?
Well, hey, Margie. I'm fine. It's awkward over here. I'm sort of used to being over there, but it's kind of nice. It's good to see you in that seat.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here, and Happy New Year.
Same to you, and Happy New Year to all those folks that are watching.
Thank you so much. The Rotary is an enormous organization that many people know about, but many people don't. So in your view, why don't you give a quick synopsis of what Rotary is really all about and its breadth, its reach?
Interesting question. Rotary's been around since 1905. A fellow that used to live in Jacksonville by the name of Paul Harris moved to Chicago, and when he was up there, he decided to form a group of, at that time, businessmen that were in different organizations, different businesses, to get together and to not only cooperate with each other business-wise, but in addition to that, to be able to do something in the community as a benefit to the community. And he came back here in 1912. Actually, he came back here in 1905 and asked Jacksonville to form a club, and they didn't, and I don't really know why. But then he came back in 1912, and we would be the 41st club, and we signed on at that time, and now I understand there's about 1.2 million clubs around the world, in most places except for some of the communist countries. Rotary's motto is service above self, and that concept helps the individual to do things in the community that aren't necessarily a benefit to themselves, but it really is a very strong benefit to the community. I'll never forget, one year I was interviewing some folks that had seen the damage that was done in Nicaragua after a major hurricane went through. And they decided that why don't we collect shoes for the people that live there? And you were saying, well, why in the world would we get shoes for people living down there after the hurricane? Well, the problem is that when the hurricane came through, there was a lot of death and destruction. Animals and other things were rotting, and people weren't wearing shoes, and therefore the stuff was coming up through their feet, and they were getting very sick from it, worms and so on. And so we put the campaign together in our district, 6970, and by the time the campaign was over, we had collected 5,000 pairs of shoes. And Tommy Grimes, who is past district governor, put together a way to get them shipped down there, and then the Rotary Club in Nicaragua made arrangements to have them imported duty-free, and then that club was responsible for the distribution of the shoes to people. And it's a lifesaver. And yet, you know, you look at that and you go, really? Yeah, it's a lifesaver. And yet not very many people even know about it and know that we did it. But it's done very quietly.
Nor would anyone really think about shoes.
Yeah, and we had collections at Home Depot and other places where big 50-gallon cardboard drums, and people would just come by and toss their shoes in.
Now, as a fellow Rotarian,
example,
I do know that there is a primary mission of the Rotary. And what's interesting is that in addition to that primary mission, which we'll talk about, there are so many other wonderful things that the organization is responsible for and raises money for. But would you like to talk about what the primary mission of the Rotary Club originally was?
Well, I want to go to your second part,
Sure.
Which is the Rotary Foundation. And a lot of people aren't aware of this. Up until just recently, the Rotary Foundation was designed that every dollar you gave, 100% of that dollar went back into the community. And it could either be in the local community, it could be in the district, or it could be somewhere in the world. And the whole dollar is spent, but a chunk of it could be set aside for the district, a chunk of it could be set aside for local use, and a chunk of it could be set aside for world use. Or it could be designated just for world use. And the foundation has helped so many people around the world, and it's phenomenal. You know, we started back in the mid-'80s to try to eradicate polio, and we're so close to doing that now. We're down to 3 nations.
So that was the main mission originally of the Rotary, is to end polio in our lifetime?
No, that was in '87.
That was in '87.
Yeah, it was when we started it here in this district. But Paul's main mission was to get people together of different cultures, different religions, different bases, and have them work together. You know, in this community that we have here, we have all different kinds of people, and there are folks out there that want to divide us into segments that compete against each other wrongly. And yet, Paul's vision was totally different from that. He would like to have people of different religions all the way across the board to meet, and that way I'd get to know you. You know, if you were a different religion than I am, then I would want to know about you, and that includes that. You know, a person is more than just themselves. They're very, very deep in what they believe and what they do. So his idea was to bring them together and to have them work together for the benefit of all. And he did that, and he did it in a very successful way. And so anyway, in the mid-'80s, they started the Polio Plus campaign, and now that that's just about done, they're looking at other items. And one of the items I've been working on for years, and it's still a very important item, is having potable water in communities. And Rotary has dug thousands of wells, and that way the people have fresh water there. They've also got a program where they put into villages 2 5-gallon drums, and these 2 5-gallon drums, you can pour street water into them, and when you pull the little spigot at the bottom, it comes out clean, drinkable water. And it has a renewable filter in it, and they're finding out that the disease that's in these communities and the problem they have with dysentery and the early deaths and some of the other things that are occurring are being lessened substantially because the people have water they can drink. And that's just one of the other avenues that they're doing, and that's a worldwide approach, is the water. So
what kind of people are attracted to Rotary?
Well, it was originally designed for people of means, and I can see why. It takes money to do things. And it also, to find people of means, they probably are fairly high up in their company, if not the CEO or president or vice president, because then they have the time to spare. You get somebody in middle management and lower, and they're really very, very business. I'm a private business owner, you are too, and therefore we have the capability of carving off part of our day and doing something like this. Or carving off part of our day and going out and building something in the community with other people that benefits the community as a whole. And that's, you know, it's not just a bunch of people sitting around having lunch. It's a lot more than that, Margie. It's a commitment to give up part of your life to help others.
Beautifully put.
Anyway.
How do we get younger people, I mean really younger people, high school kids, how do we get younger people
Get them to start their
involved?
own businesses, and that way they'll have the time and the money to do it. You know, our club is an old club. We've been around over 100 years, and we laugh. It's a club of under 300, and at one time they used to joke that we had 70 members over 70. When I was brought into Rotary in 1980, I was the youngest Rotarian in that club. I've been a member of that club. Joined in 1980. I had to go to Washington and came back, and I rejoined in 88, I believe, 87 or 88, and then I had 25 years of perfect attendance.
Do you want to say which club that was?
The Rotary Club of Jacksonville.
Okay.
And a lot of people call it the Downtown Club or whatever, but why perfect attendance?
That's pretty remarkable.
Well, the reason is that Rotary requires that you attend 80% of the meetings. If you don't, you can't be a member. And they had a very rigorous makeup requirement back before you joined. It used to be that if you skipped a week, the following week you had to make it up, or you had to make it up the previous week. They've now slid it to 2 weeks. So if you miss it, you can skip a week and still make it up in either direction. And then they went to where you can make it up on the internet, which is kind of wimpy, but that's what they did. I really think makeups are important. I've made up all over the place, and you get to meet some wonderful people doing wonderful things in their communities. You get new ideas, and then you begin to share some of your ideas in the club where you make up. And the folks in our club that are made up around the world, Mike Lanahan, for instance, is made up in other places in America, and there are others in our club that have done that. You get a deeper sense of the commitment that people have making things better. And this is not an organization that just sits around and does nothing. It's an organization that does a lot, but it's under the radar screen. It's very quiet, it's very subtle, and it just goes right on out and does its work in the community, redoing baseball fields so that kids will have a place to play. Putting together community facilities so people have a place to go to. I mean, it's just the things that they do here in Jacksonville are just wonderful.
Do you think that the so-called maybe modesty behind self-promotion by Rotary is hurting them in terms of drawing members, or because they do keep growing, so they're really not hurting from membership? Do you think that it would help them to expand the membership if they were more out there with their promotion?
Well, you asked the question about the younger person. The problem is the younger person, they have young kids, they have ball games they have to go to, they have other things that distract and detract from them. We want to expand the membership, we'd like to have it be younger, but you get a negative return the younger you get because of other things that draw on those people.
Right.
And you want to be sure if you're going to be a Rotarian, it's not a, okay, I got the X in the block for being a Rotarian, let's see, what else can I join? Can I join this over here and get an X here? And I mean, how's this going to look at my resume? And that's not what we're looking for. If Rotarians are people that are dedicated.
Passionate.
Yeah, they're passionate about it. And a lot of that goes back to their faith. I mean, people that have a strong faith also want to do things for others. Mm-hmm. There's just no doubt about that. Mm-hmm. No matter what your faith is, you still want to do things for others.
Now, I think it should go without saying, but let's just say it, that the Rotary is comprised of all different faiths and all different genders and all different kinds of people, as you said.
You're not a man, you're a woman. Is that right? There are different genders in Rotary? You know, I didn't know that.
But we need
How
to
many
keep
years have I
fighting
been
in that
in this
direction.
thing? And what are you about to say?
Now, all right. So you are a born and bred Jacksonville man, as I can tell.
Oh!
Tell us about...
My hair. It's my hair, isn't it?
Yeah. Tell us about growing up in Jacksonville. Specifically, why were you drawn to the Rotary? Was it your parents? Was it your schooling? Why Rotary?
It was my dad. My dad was doing graduate work at MIT. And this was back before the Model A came out. And one of his projects he was working on at MIT was putting air conditioners in cars. Interesting. Yeah. And his major was aerospace engineering. And think about it, when did the Wright brothers fly? I mean, this is, you know, it's aerospace engineering. How can you, awful young at it. And he was driving back on a break from MIT and got home and got very, very sick and had polio. And polio took the use of both of his legs. And they said, yeah, you'll never walk again. And he had a chance to go to Warm Springs to do therapy because they thought the Warm Springs would help to maybe get the blood flow going and get the muscles working again. Of course, the disease destroyed the muscles.
Do you know that Babe Ruth went there?
Do I have what?
Do you know that Babe Ruth was at Warm Springs?
No, I didn't know that. Yeah, but Dad met the governor of New York at that time, who later became president. And I asked him about Roosevelt, and he said, Dad, do you like him? He says, well, he's okay. He's personable, but I hate his politics. I said, really? He said, yeah. I really hate his politics. And Dad was very, since he'd been hurt, here he is, he's a cripple, and now he meets my mother, and they date.
Did they meet at Warm Springs?
No.
Okay.
No, they met down here, and they met, and they fell in love and got married, and right after they got married and had my brother, he comes down with tuberculosis. And so he's in bed for a year. And he talks about, you know, back then they didn't have the beds that puff up and puff down, so he was getting bed sores, and he was telling me about the healing power of the lick of a dog. Now you think about that and go, yuck. Yeah, well, they had dogs in the house, and the dogs would come over and lick the wounds, and it's interesting, the wounds were healing. Fascinating.
Very.
Don't know if medically if that's true or not,
Fascinating.
because he told me the story, but that's just a story.
Don't do this at home?
Well, you don't know. But anyway, he was asked to join Rotary. He did, and this is back in the days before you had handicap ramps and all that. And he would struggle to get up the steps of the George Washington Hotel. And he was the kind of man, you know, when you had polio back then, they said, you know, you may think you're handicapped, but you're not. You just don't have the use of your legs. So you need to figure out a way to be normal. And so Dad had tremendous upper body strength. And so when he would climb the stairs, he would grab a railing and he would swing a leg out and get the knee to stiffen. And when he stiffened, he'd then pull. and pull himself up, and then he'd do the thing same again. So he would gradually get himself up the stairs, and then he'd make it into the room, and he would be there with other Rotarians, great men of Jacksonville, and they would sit at the same table. It's changed now a little bit. They want you to move around and meet other people. Back then,
And now there's some great women of Jacksonville too.
anyway, back then,
You promised you'd give me a hard time today. I have to give you a little bit back.
well, you know, it's just one of those things. But anyway, he was the one that put me up for membership.
Okay.
And that was back in 1980, and I was awed by the men that were in that club, because here I am, the youngster, in there in 1980. And I was 45, and I was the youngster.
Well, you were quite an awesome person yourself. But the kind of work that you did, you were a flyer, right? And you went to bowls, and you had a very strong educational background. Will you tell the viewers a little bit about your career and your flying background and some of the exciting moments of that part of your life?
Now, let's see. My wife and I met in college, and we married after we graduated. And
Where was college?
Presbyterian College in Clinton, South Carolina, and a very small school, 600 students, and I think only a dozen number of women back then. Now it's the percentage has grown quite a bit, but back then, and you never dated a co-ed. I mean, it was the wrong thing to do. I mean, you had reputation. You couldn't date anybody else. You had to date a co-ed. I mean, it was just one of those things. But I ended up marrying a co-ed. Anyway, we got married, and she grew up in a small town in South Georgia where her mother and father worked in the same business together. And when we married, we were both school teachers. And I was teaching at Bowles, and she was teaching at Episcopal. And we lived at Bowles. They had some apartments there. And
You attended Bowles as well, is that correct?
I graduated in the class of '63. And Mike Shad, who graduated in class of '64, and others that are still here in Jacksonville. But Dickie Soley, who was a dentist, is class of '64. But anyway, graduated with Dan Davis, who inherited the Winn-Dixie.
Really?
Yeah, his father and uncle formed Winn-Dixie here in Jacksonville, and they have the D-Dot Ranch out in Wyoming, and they have 33,000 acres here in Jacksonville, just east of the beltway that swings around on the east side of town. Used to raise buffalo out there.
33,000 acres.
Yeah, just, nice place to be. Yeah. Anyway, getting back to people that we met in Rotary, I was awed by that, and I was fascinated. Jim Gorman was the district governor at that time, and Jim started the Polio Plus program, and I didn't know why until later on. He told me that his sister had polio and died from it, and he had a real passion for it. Our district at that time raised the most money of any district in the world the first time out, and it was beautiful to see that. Here's our little district, 6970. In the whole world, we start to raise the money for. And since then, the Bill Gates Foundation has put money in it, and others, and we're so close. But it's just, for instance, the Mercy Ship. It does a wonderful work. People volunteer
Can you
and go
talk
on.
about the Mercy Ship a little bit?
Well, the Mercy Ship is just a hospital ship that parks off the coast of Africa, and everybody on it's a volunteer. And you go and you can volunteer for months or weeks or whatever you want to do. And
So it's not particular to the Rotarians or the Rotary?
Well, what was interesting about Rotary is Rotary put a surgical unit on that ship, cost $500,000, to where now they're performing surgeries on a regular basis. And they also donated money for a Land Rover, so instead of people walking for days to come out to the coast to get on the ship to have surgery done, they could actually go into the bush and pick them up and bring them out. And the work that the Mercy Ship is doing is phenomenal.
Didn't the Rotary also finance a community medical bus or van that is used now in Jacksonville?
It's like a Greyhound bus. It's big. And for St. Vincent's, and the whole district got involved in that. It wasn't, well, the Rotary Club of Jacksonville kind of spearheaded it, but the whole community of Rotarians chipped in and put this thing together. And it's designed to go into communities where they don't have a lot of medical service and maybe don't have a hospital, and they have doctors from St. Vincent's and nurses that volunteer, and they go out, and people, matter of fact, there are stories I've been told that the people will not go to a hospital because it intimidates them, but they'd be willing to go to this, this large bus It's a
Well,
mobile
also, a
medical
lot of
unit.
times they don't have transportation, so this is a
It
wonderful
could be possible
gift.
too, yeah. But it spreads around in the 5-county area, and it does just a great job.
That's fantastic. Now, you were a flyer. Tell me about the years that you were a flyer.
Well, let's see. You start out with my wife, and what was interesting about that is that we bought an airplane. We had a car and an airplane. We had a 65 MGB, and we owned a Cessna 150, and on the weekends we go fly somewhere. And came back, and I was president of the Jacksonville Chess Club at that time, and there was a guy there, Greg Wren, who was a Navy pilot, and he said, well, why don't you fly for free? I said, well, that's intriguing. Well, how do I do that? He says, well, you just join the Navy, and then you can fly for free, and you don't have to, pay for insurance and gas and all that. I said, okay, what do I need to do? He says, well, just go on down and take the test. And I'd already passed the physical because I was A1 when I got out of college, and they'd already called me up, and then because I taught math at Bowles, they gave me an A2, which deferred me unless they really needed me, and so I had to defer it. And so then after 3 years, I decided, well, I'll check into this Navy thing about flying, and I actually went down and signed up and came home and told Paula that I'd signed up to have a career in the Navy.
After you signed up, you told your wife.
Yeah, then I told my wife, and we've been married
Interesting.
45 years now, and it's
Shocking.
amazing that the marriage lasted that long. It really is.
Absolutely.
Every time I tell people that story, they go, "You're married?" Well, yeah, she cried for 6 weeks. I mean, it was unbelievable. It was just horrible. What I put her through, and that's dummy.
That's quite a big announcement to
I'm
come
not
home
saying
with.
I was a male chauvinist then, but I was the closest thing to it.
Okay.
At
least you
it's a
admit it.
man's world. Hey, listen, I'm in charge, that kind of thing.
You've evolved.
It was later I found out that I wasn't in charge, but, at that time I thought I was. And anyway, I'd been flying for a couple of years before I went in, and then the Navy really taught me how to fly. And I flew A7s and A4s. They were attack airplanes, and I flew off of carriers, and did that for a while, and then worked out of Iceland for 5 years.
You were in Iceland as
Yeah.
part of the Navy?
Yeah, with Commander Fleeter Keflavik. And then I had an opportunity to be on a staff that worked carriers up, Cargo 2, and I was the air ops officer on that staff, and we'd go out and work the carriers up. And that's when I first noticed that the Navy was not winding them as tight as when I first came in. And they're not winding them nearly as tight as they were when I was there working those kids up. I mean, it's...
I'm not sure how
it's
people in the
interesting.
service would feel hearing that right now.
They would understand. They would not say a
Be
word.
specific.
They
What
would
do you
not,
mean?
No, well, I don't need to do that.
Okay.
But anyway, I'm flying. I love flying. And so I retired in 2000 from the Navy as a reservist, and spent 30 years in, and retired as a captain. But I
You
have
retired as a captain in the Navy.
but I have
How
a,
wonderful.
But I have a passion for flying. I really do. I've got a couple of old airplanes. One is a 1956 G model Bonanza, and it's a fun thing to fly. It's a V-tail, and the other airplane is a 1947 Cub Cruiser, which is a tail dragger. It's got fabric on it, and it's just they're just fun to fly.
Do you keep these at Cecil Airport, is that correct?
No, they're out of Craig.
What was your, you had some connection with Cecil Airport, no?
That's where the Navy assigned me.
Oh, okay, okay.
I was in VA 105, the gunslingers there for 2.5 years.
So your planes, your personal planes are at Craig Airport?
Yeah, they're hangared at Craig.
And does your wife fly with you, or do you
She
fly
flies
alone?
with me. She's had 2 lessons, and she's decided that she doesn't want to be a pilot. She would prefer to ride.
Okay, very nice. And you, outside of Rotary, I know you're very passionate about Rotary. There's almost no one more passionate than you, and I assume that's why you wanted originally to get involved with the Rotary News Network. Is that so? Your passion drove you here?
Jim Gorman, who was past district governor, approached me and says, Ken, I've got a terminal lung disease. And I don't know of anyone else around that could do the show for me. And I'd like you to do it. And I said, Jim, I don't know anything about this stuff. And he says, well, why don't you come on out? Because if I quit doing it, it dies. And I went, oops, okay. So I co-hosted with him.
Okay.
And so I'd sat next to him. And then we'd have the guest here, and he'd ask a question, I'd ask a question, and we'd ping-pong it back and forth. And 3 months later, he said, time for you to take over. I said, great. So I interviewed him. That's why I knew how to do this, is that I put him over here, and so the last show he had was a chance for him to be interviewed so that people would get to know him, and then I did his eulogy when he passed away a few years after that.
Beautiful. Well, we have a little less than 5 minutes to go, and what I'd really like people to appreciate is not only your passion for Rotary, but the kind of person you are and the kind of character that you are.
I am a character.
You
There's
are
no
a
doubt about it.
character.
I mean, you've already uncovered
that
that.
word
Yeah.
very carefully.
Yeah.
You do so much more than Rotary. And as you said, Rotary is not something that you take lightly. It's not something that you check off. You've done your Rotary bit for the month. It's an involvement. In addition to Rotary, you do all these things with prisons. Tell the audience a little bit about those things.
I'm president of Prisoners of Christ, which is an organization that captures a man as soon as he gets out of prison to enable him to get on his feet and be a productive member of society. It costs us between $25,000 and $30,000 a year to house one of these men. But if we can bring him back, get him deprogrammed from the culture that he was in prison and get him to be where he can be successful and be employed, then he can be a taxpayer
Yeah.
and a contributor to Jacksonville and the surrounding areas. And we've been doing that now for 25 years, and we've had close to 1,000 men re-engage in the city. Another ministry that I'm chairman of the board of is Hope Outreach Ministry for Everyone, and it's in the inner city at 12th and Liberty Street. And that's a food desert, and what we try to do is provide food and clothing absolutely free to the people that live in that area. And also as a ministry, we reach out to people for other needs. The inner city of Jacksonville, unfortunately, is heavily infected with AIDS, and so we provide free AIDS testing down there so that people can see if they have it and start to work the process to see whether or not they can be cured.
Now, does any of the work you do with the Hope Ministry overlap with the Rotary in that you can bring the medical van from St. Luke's that the Rotary funded down to the Hope Ministry food desert so that the people can also get medical service?
I haven't been able to coordinate anything like
Okay.
that. The people there are pretty close to Shands Hospital, and it's for the kind of people that we work with, they treat it for free, so
Okay.
Shands is a place that they can go to.
Which is now being called
Well, it's
UF.
University of Florida,
UF.
Shands, yeah. So, another ministry is First Ministries, and the ministry there is focused on helping people at City Rescue Mission, and also coming down to Hope Outreach Ministries for Everyone. Dr. Bryce comes in, and she works with the women. The executive director, Eric Lockett, is a male, and we have women that are struggling just like men are, and
Sure.
and some of them have been taken advantage of because of their situation, and so it's awkward to have counseling from a male. So we have Barbara come in, and she does the counseling there, and also she does a worship service on Wednesdays for the group, and it's really touching what she does. And then she goes to City Rescue Mission and works with the men in City Rescue Mission for the other day. She's not at Hope Outreach Ministry for Everyone. And then First Coast Christian Outreach, I work with them. They're working on the Nehemiah Centers, which are the centers where we're trying to bring the male back into the family in the whole community. There's one part of the community that needs that more than others, but it's the whole community that's struggling with that. And if we can bring the father back into the network, now sometimes it's difficult because we've met some women that have had 6 children, each by a different male, and so which one would then step up to be the father? But trying to put that together to help fathers rejoin
That's
families.
fantastic. We have about 30 seconds to go, and I just want to tell you, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, it's all right.
But you are clearly so deeply involved in service to others, and so clearly the Rotary isn't the reason, but the Rotary is a fortunate outcome. And I just want people to know that Jacksonville is such a large city that there really are 8 Rotaries in Jacksonville, but we are all doing good things. And Ken, I just deeply respect your history here and your future with us, and thank you so much for being our first guest of the new year.
Well, Margie, it was great. And I want to say a shout out to David Dell. He is with Comcast and has been a tremendous help to all of us here. Just been a wonderful man.
Yeah, I want to thank Comcast and the viewers for watching, and David and John, thank you so much, and we'll see you next month.